Well, I want to say greetings and salutations to those who are watching this video. And what I'm doing is I want to plug a research project that uh, I and my colleagues have been working on for several years. And the title of the project is called Highway 80, a drive through Alabama civil rights corridor. And it has climaxed with the publication of our the fourth edition of our book, wherein we have tapped some of the top researchers in the country, which typically happen to be in the Black Belt itself, to talk about topics of importance that originated in the 17 or so some odd counties that make up the Black Belt of Alabama. We know that the Black Belt of Alabama is one part of a belt of rich soil wherein agriculture, particularly cotton, was king. And that belt actually, the economic aspect of it starts in Virginia and works its way down the eastern seaboard across Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and into Texas. And what we're hoping to do is we're hoping to build a cultural heritage corridor along Highway 80, which also cuts into and encompasses a majority of what we call the Black Belt. So you see, this is multi-demographical, and Highway 80 is used as the primary reference because of its relationship to the region that has produced so much civil rights history, so much U.S. history, and has produced prolific personalities and events that have shaped our consciousness. And so our effort is to have this region recognized as a cultural heritage corridor with the U.S. Park Service, and to draw into one demographic the diversity of personality and the diversity of systems that lie within Highway 80. In this particular edition, we start in Macon County, and we travel from Macon County in discussing the Tuskegee Airmen, the Gamillion versus Lightfoot, the Tuskegee Institute Advancement League, and we go from there into Montgomery County. We discuss the Montgomery bus boycott at length, and we bring up things that typically have not been discussed in other books, and we interview people and ask for and have received contributions from people who have really given us some great insight into the boycott itself, personalities surrounding the boycott. Uh, Dr. Valda Montgomery did a great chapter on Dean's Drugstore, which she is related to the family, and we talk about Lowndes County, the Lowndes County Freedom Organization. We talk about the Selma to Montgomery March. We talk about some underlying economic factors that led to the current state in the Black Belt. We have spatial and empirical data on different aspects of social life in the Black Belt, like poverty, education level. We talk about the role that knowledge plays in the development of uh, determining factors that either hinder or assist in the advancement of people in the Black Belt. We talk about personalities specifically that played roles that that you don't hear about, like the Doyles in Selma and the Courageous Eight. Uh, uh, we have contributions regarding the presence and the study that W.B. Du Bois did in Lowndes County. We have accounts of other events that took place that you can put in reference to what took place in the Black Belt. We have testimony from students who sat in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and how that relates to the sit-ins that and the movements that have taken place in the Black Belt of Alabama. We have government analysis by uh, a person that spent over 40 years in state government and actually uh, witnesses and identifies the strategic changes that took place in governmental policy that undermined growth that was taking place at a certain time. It's these types of things that are critical to our understanding so we can build narratives of self-determination. We have a chapter on the impetus of Alabama State University and those people who were responsible for the growth of Alabama State University in Marion, Alabama, under the heading of Lincoln Normal School. So this is a very comprehensive piece of work, and we're writing this to give the reader information that they typically would not have, perspectives that they would not have. We have editorials and commentaries in here as well that touch on a variety of subjects because we're seeking to bring more intellectual integrity to the study of civil rights and this particular region. It's not just it's not a book of commemoration. It's not a book just of ceremony, but we hope to make this very substantive and very conclusive because people will write a book and they'll mention Lowndes County or the subject will be Lowndes County, but there are no solutions offered and there are no means or methods of building models of self-determination off of the research. But the purpose of our research is self-determination. It is to build models primarily for the people who live in the Black Belt. It's self-empowering. We're not doing this for money or fame per se, but we're hoping to do this so people can grab hold of the information and use it to change their circumstances. And I think the cadre of people that we have that have devoted countless hours and have devoted because we've got other books that are on the in the hopper or on the launch pad. We're just waiting to do it. So we've gotten tremendous feedback from people and from even people in the community who have given us certain heirlooms or certain keepsakes from the movement that they didn't know what to do with it. So they gave it to us and we published it. And even the cover itself has embedded in it something that is unique to civil rights history. And you'll have to look at the cover and examine the cover to see just what it is. And it's not something that that we're going to admit to. It's not something that we're going to identify. But if you study the cover, you will see something in there that that is very unusual and unique to our civil rights history that only we have had access to, and that is because of the contributions that people have given to us and the proximity that we have been in times past to very key aspects of our history. We have pictures in here from the movement. Some people have donated to us. Others we have gotten from repositories like Tuskegee, Alabama State University, and other places. But we typically don't have to go far because there's a lot of information that is available. We do lectures, we do presentations, and one of the major accomplishments academically to our efforts, and if you're a teacher, you know, to have a whole conference done on your topic, that's a major thing. So we want to thank the Alabama-Mississippi Sociological Association for adopting our civil rights corridor as the theme for its past conference. And we had sociologists from all over the world to come and to give their own research on the topics that we have published on. So that's a very high honor, and we humbly accept that honor because we're doing this for the students and we're doing this for the people primarily in the Black Belt. You can pick the book up at linuslearning.com. That's Linus Learning, Learning.com, linuslearning.com, and the title is Highway 80, A Drive Through Alabama's Civil Rights Corridor.
What was the inspiration or the urgency to do this type of work, being that you are over the history department of HBCU? Don't you already teach these type of things?
Well, interestingly enough, my pedigree is very unusual in that I've taught African American Humanities for many years, and I'm now in the political science and the criminal justice department. But what started this project was actually a visit that I made to some kinfolks of mine in South Carolina, and they are part of what's called the Gullah Geechee community. And when I was there, I was invited by a fellow Tuskegean who graduated from Tuskegee. His name is Oching Campbell, and his parents were a part of the leadership of the Gullah Geechee community, and they were responsible for, along with other officials at all levels of government, for creating what's called the Gullah Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor. So the concept of the corridor came from me visiting them and being treated to their hospitality and having visited some of the key sites that teach Gullah Geechee heritage there. And so visiting Penn City and some of the other places and interacting with the people, I wasn't in one of the exhibits 5 minutes before, and some of those pictures are actually in the book, of the people that were there and the exhibits that were there. I wasn't there 5 minutes before I said we need a civil rights corridor. I mean, it just popped into my head, and that's when I started writing. When I returned I started writing while we were in South Carolina, and identifying what topics that we could use to try to create a corridor similar to the Gullah Geechee corridor in South Carolina. And the interesting thing about it is that the Highway 80 is important because Highway 80 already has several interpretive centers along it, here in Montgomery, in Lowndes County, in Selma, right? So we've got the interpretive centers, but we don't have the corridor. They've got the corridor, but they don't have any interpretive centers. At least at the time we were there. So our goal was to, rather than start with the public policy issues, is to start with the academics, and then hopefully the academics will impact policy. Everything we're doing is strategic, right? And it comes from the contributions that technicians in political organizing, in academics, have made on how to do this thing, right? Because we could have not published anything and just wrote letters and brought people together and start the community conversation, start the community committee and just get the thing done, through Congress, but we didn't want to do that. We wanted it to start in the classroom, and build a mass emphasis, which is something that educators nowadays are either afraid to do, discouraged from doing, or don't. So everything we do is political. It all has a political aspect to it. So the inspiration, to answer your question, came from the Gullah Geechee people. And big shout out to Emory Campbell in South Carolina, who's made it, who's one of the driving forces behind that. But our strategy was different. Our strategy was to publish first, document, do presentations for a couple of years, try to impact as much of the topics that are being discussed, say like at the Alabama Historic Commission Conference, because of the circumstances that, the Black Heritage Conference was canceled, but a great part of that was going to be what we were doing. And we were just using our influence to insert this movement into what everybody's doing. So if you look up, and this is designated a cultural heritage corridor, but none of our names are associated with it, that's fine, because the whole point was to create mass emphasis, and whoever gets to it first will get to it, that's fine. But that was the impetus of it. What the Gullah Geechee people
Well,
were
let
doing.
me ask you this as well. You said that you're introducing it into the classrooms. With the state of our educational system, at what point do you think that we should start introducing something like this to our children? Is it what I'm saying is, can we start introducing it to our children in high school and middle school? Is it an easy enough read that they can start to understand or get a better understanding as to what the civil rights movement really looked like, as opposed to the whitewashed, watered down version that they're getting in public schools now?
Right. Well, what happens is the narrative has been controlled by other people for so long. So we would think that our kids would have a knowledge of this stuff when they really don't. And a lot that's in this book are things that you will have not have heard in other places because of the conclusions that we draw. Right. A lot of your research doesn't draw conclusions, and it's not something that that the reader can put the book down and go out there and do, right? And so that's what we're doing. You can read a chapter of this book, not not all of them. You can read one chapter of this book, and from what we have provided, actually go out and start a conversation with a city council person about something that needs to be done. Primarily, national historic sites, like the Black Belt. This corridor is full of national historic sites, but who's going to do the work to get it done? You know, so and so lived in this house right here on this address right here. Well, where'd you get that from? I read that in this book. So and so, that needs to be a net. So people can take this and actually go out and impact policy, because that's what we want. We want as many policy impactors as possible, right? And several of the contributors did not have degrees in history, right? But they're master historians. They're documentary people. They're people. So we categorize them as citizen scientists, which means that they don't have the credential as far as the institution is concerned, but they definitely have what we call the street cred, and they have the ability to put out top-notch stuff. And so an independent researcher, not backed by an institution, will give you, in our opinion, when it comes down to this topic, give you a better perspective than somebody that's trying to please an editorial board or trying to please a committee of people that they have to go through, who have already pre-committed themselves to a narrative, right? In another, we want you to get this edition, and it typically costs about $35, but in editions to come, we're going to challenge the narrative that Rosa Parks was the mother of the civil rights movement, because that statement was not made by anybody associated with the civil rights movement. It was made by a reporter. And so we're going to show that there are other women whose contributions need to be discussed. Nobody's going to dethrone anybody, right? Rosa Parks is going to stay where she is, but you can build models of self-determination off of Mary Louise Smith, Claudette Colin, Rhea Browder, Susan McDonald, Joanne Robinson, Mary Fairburn. You can build models of self-determination off of those women. Right. Claudette Colvin's story is a story that every little teenage black girl in America needs to hear, because it's typical. But nobody knows what happened to her, and nobody knows those. And so, is those areas that we're daring to go in, typically because of the fact of what's at stake. So we're going to be very tenacious in what we do because of what's at stake in the community at large, right? So when a little kid, when a teenager, or heck, a college student, an adult, when they pick this book up, I would just thumb through it, and I would start at the back of the book, because we have here some documents from SNCC that are very rare on their position in Vietnam, on their challenging of Chase Manhattan Bank. In a previous edition, I don't know why I didn't make it into this one, we had papers on a race riot that took place in Prattville because of SNCC. Yeah, and nobody ever talks about that. It's in the previous, the one that's up on the shelf. Yeah, and so, these are the types of things. And how does this come about? This comes about because when we go and lecture and talk in the field, right, we're field practitioners, right? We're not just classroom practitioners, which is what a lot of people want, teachers. A lot of people want teachers to stay in the classroom. Teach, go home. Teach, go home. But no, we're out in the field constantly. And people come up to us and say, well, listen, I've got this information. What can you do with it? Or did you know that this was sitting somewhere and nobody did? Okay, did you know? So we follow up on these leads and we come up with these documents, that are in the public domain, but nobody's using, right? So, we're excited about what we're doing. It's very unique. We've got contributions from people who were there, like Willie Mukasa Ricks. He wrote a part he referred to Highway 80 as the bloodiest highway in America. You see? But when you bring in Willie Ricks, you bring in Pan-Africanism, which opens up the door for discussions about Pan-Africanist influences in the civil rights movement and in the South in particular. You see? So there's so many doors that open up, and the more we publish, the more we write, the more we give presentations, the more that we put on the web, the more these conversations will take place amongst people whom typically we would not have the conversation with. You see? So that's why we talk about creating a mass emphasis. Obi Igbuna Jr. Does a segment of a chapter on a mythical interview that he had with W.B. Du Bois. And basically he's taking different excerpts from W.B. Du Bois's writings and fitting it into questions that we would ask today. So what questions did W.B. Du Bois answer, 100 years ago? You see, what questions in 1915 did he have answered for us in 2015 or 2020, you see? So it's those types of things that inspired us. But primarily and I went all the way around the world, but primarily it was the Gullah Geechee efforts in South Carolina.
Now, self-determination is something that's not commonly associated with the civil rights movement, and that's largely as a consequence of how these narratives have been produced. What made you decide to focus on that in your book?
Pragmatism and pure necessity. There's nothing that we need this information. We're dying for the lack of it, and something has to be done at my level, which is the classroom level. And when I say classroom, I don't tell people that I teach in college. I don't use terms like professor or anything like that. I'm a classroom teacher, period, because we're all connected and we're all associated with knowledge, or we're supposed to be, right? And so when we talk about self-determination, we have to understand that there is a concerted effort to stop anything from which a model of self-determination can be built. It is an intentional thing done by a cadre of people, not to preach, teach, publish, illustrate, or bring to discussion anything from which black folk can build a self-determined model, because everybody else is dependent on us. Everything as it exists now is dependent on black people remaining in the situation that they're in. But once black people build a model for self-determination, everybody who is exploiting, dependent on, or using or sucking the energy, resources from our people are going to have to come up with another scheme. And that ultimately will lead to pretty much the revolution that everybody's talking about. It's just all the revolution is simply black people coming into that model of self-determination. And I think that if we would appreciate just how much has gone into keeping black people, from determining those things, the efforts that have been gone. I mean, you've had president of African nations assassinated purely to stop that message. You've had people thrown in jail. Most of your political and intellectual dissidents have been created, have suffered just because they were thinkers. So we have to look at, we talk about different things matter. Well, black thought matters. Black thought matters more than anything else. But the thinking of black people for so long has been relegated to and influenced by people who would be the direct casualty of black thought, which means that once black people begin to think for themselves and begin to do for self, it's a whole lot of stuff that's going to go kaput. A lot of it. So when a student, and I don't want to sound a certain kind of way, but when a student drops out of school, that may be an act of resistance. It just might be. When black people don't vote, that may be a referendum on black leadership. You see? So in the social sciences, we'll go there, but you can't go there in other areas, And so when we talk about black people not voting, or we talk about even black on black crime could be looked at as a social disorder associated with colonialism. You see, because wherever you go in the world, you have white people in charge of black people, and black people are killing each other. So it's a global thing, right? Well, we can go there in the social sciences, but
even with that, isn't that a fallacy? Black on black crime. That's
well,
I mean, because what I'm saying is people hurt people that are closest to them in proximity,
right?
And we're just taking out and demonize.
But part of colonialism also means
well, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that's what we say. It's a facet of colonialism.
Yeah.
So as the decolonization process gains momentum, black on black crime becomes less and less of a reality. But there's certain measures that have to be put in place. You see, and so the measures will start not at the street level between black people, but the measures will start with City Hall. You see, because you will have put the pieces of the puzzle together, and we don't know. See, because one of the things that we in the next issue, not in this one, but get this one, but the next one, we're going to talk about the St. John's Dixon case, to where young black kids learn to despise the police. See, they learn to despise the police because the police represented everything contrary to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Right. The police were looked at as being, so if you cannot trust the law, you have to take matters into your own hands, and that's what a lot of black on black crime is. It is simply the inability or to have a petition redressed, which is guaranteed under the First Amendment. You have a right to have your petitions heard. You see? So all of those things are connected together, but who would start with City Hall? You see? It's harder to vote out mayors than it is to vote out a president.
You mentioned earlier about a referendum on black leadership, and I'm curious about how you would reach mass emphasis in a context where the production of self-determination may also mean the removal of black leadership, or the change of black leadership, or reconsideration of black leadership.
Absolutely. The adopting of self-determination as a mass emphasis may also lead to my removal.
Yep.
So I have to start with me.
Right.
I will not be needed anymore. You see? And so, but that is contrary to the natural selection of politics, right? The first rule of politics is self-preservation. So you're not going to do anything to benefit other people if that at the same time means your political demise. Nobody does that, which means every politician will have to set up a system to where they must be needed. So you have to understand that politicians have been compromised. Most of them. Most of the people who are in charge now have risen to power under the very system that we're trying to get rid of. And that's something that you'll have to accept, right? So self-determination is an act of love because you are actually training people not to need you. And in a Western capitalistic culture, need is paramount, you see? So that's why you have to have morals. That's why you have to have values. And that's why your intentions have to be clear, right? Is that if we're successful, my daughter's generation will not need me because they will have been given a proper latitude. You know, they've been given proper coordinates, and all they have to do is plug those coordinates in and work the plan from a scientific perspective, not an emotional one, which means that you'll be dealing with a Negro who is not sentimental, who's not emotional, you know, who's not caught up into a lot of feeling and sensuality. You'll deal with a self-determined Negro who will logically and reasonably plot a course through, and you won't have to have any kind of ideology or anything like that, because all of those things in a lot of instances are simply disguises of fear. So when people in movements we deal with mass emphasis, most of the time people will go ideological with you. That's why people will focus on King's dream but not his plans.
Mm-hmm.
See, King had a plan, you see, and it was a darn good one, but who reads? Well, the people who have risen to power off of the problem will do everything they can to kill any type of discussion of the plan, but they'll promote the dream. So people will evaluate his dream, and you know, and which doesn't implement anything. It doesn't give anybody any marching orders. It doesn't give, because, you know, teenagers, they want A, B, C, D, E, F, G. I want to do this, and I want to be left alone. Whatever's going to happen, it should not cause me to have to be dependent on you. You know, the teenagers are like that. They don't like to be dependent on people, right? Well, that's what happens. See, because when you give the kid the information and you train them and teach them properly in the way that they should go, you are simultaneously negating yourself from the equation. But who wants to do that?
But isn't that the job of a parent or a successful society to keep it going? Is to train up the younger ones to keep that ball rolling so they can replicate the same thing.
Yeah, well, yeah, and see here again, that question is going to be answered in the social science because one generation, Arnold Toynbee, who's a historian, talked about role reversal, and he talked about how one generation having accomplished a great task in their generation will turn right around and be the biggest hindrance to the next generation.
Right.
So that generation has to be moved out of the way, right? Mm-hmm. And so what the academy does is it is supposed to ensure that the generation under it is not in that type of repressed or need for the previous generation because you've learned from it. So you've got the knowledge that's necessary, right? And so what could be argued is that this society as it is now creates a society of dependence. Mm-hmm. You see? And so because everybody is dependent, it's like, you know, some of the things we talk about in here, we answer the epistemological question, right? Because one of the things we discovered is what Harold Cruz discovered in his book, Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, that we did not learn from our experiences what we think we learned. We really didn't. And the elephant in the room is everybody waiting on the revelation of what we got from the civil rights movement, and there is none. Now, the people who are in the civil rights, they can't make that statement, but we can. You see? Because that gives us the opportunity to bring out the revelations that the average, ordinary person with no history of what went on can implement without the knowledge of what is going on and be successful without even having known who Stokely Carmichael was or who, you see what I'm saying? Because the lessons learned from those personalities will have been formatted in a way that the student can sit down and put into practice self-determination, you know, without having to have indulged themselves, you know, in the occult and esoteric aspects, you know, of things that the people who were even experiencing it didn't understand. There are a lot of things that those people that went through that movement, they did not know the meaning of what they were doing. And they'll tell you that. The ramifications of it, and so that's why you have to have critical analysis, because you can ask a Diane Nash that if you knew now what you knew then, would you have done it the way you would have done it? See, one of my students asked her that when she lectured in my class about 10 years ago. You know, and her answer was no. She said if she had known more about her environment, more about what was going on, their approach would have been totally different. And the same issues that busted SNCC up, that busted the Panthers up, that busted SCL, or, you know, neutralized SCLC, those same issues we're stumbling over today. The same issues. The Arab-Israeli conflict, war, you know, the global expansion of economics, the environment. See, we're still, as black folk, we're still stumbling over those issues, right? Because the paradigms that we have been taught, or the lack thereof, you know, tend to peek its head when other people shape our policy, when we don't shape it ourselves. So a black person, our black leadership's opinion of, let's say, the Arab-Israeli conflict or Zionism or whatever, will be no different than that of the political party that they're aligned with. When we should have a different perspective on things, considering the fact that so many people on both sides, both in Israel and Palestine, have consulted us and have a relationship with us. So our contribution to their struggle on both sides should be different than what our political allies' opinion is.
I was almost going to ask you to get in trouble and expound on that, but I'm not going to
We'll
do
save
that.
that.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to do. Dr. White?
All right.
No, leave it on, Antoine.
Yeah.
We appreciate you. We're going to have you on for a live interview.
Okay.
We want everybody to go out and get this book. Start sharing it with their children.
Yeah.
And share it with yourself, because a lot of people, obviously don't have an accurate look into the subject of the civil rights movement and what it really meant and what people really did and went through. So we have to re-educate a lot of grown folks as well.
Absolutely.
As
Absolutely.
well. So, Corona's going on, so go out and get the book. You locked up with your family anyway.
You got time.
And sit down and go through the book as a family.
That's right.
I mean, that's we have to get back to the old ways.
That's right.
Of passing on knowledge.
Right.
In a family setting.
Right.
You
And
know,
see, a lot of people don't know that the concept and the anthem and the symbolism of the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense got started in Lowndes County, Alabama.
That's right. That's right.
Which is right in their backyard. Go get it.